Hello. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for coming for this installment of Southern Jewish Voices meets Florina Newcomb. We're very excited to hear Florina's story today. Southern Jewish Voices is in its 4th year now. It is in part funded by the Birmingham Jewish Federation and Foundation. And it's just a lovely way to, for posterity, save all of these different stories from Jewish people who are living in the South to show the diversity of life that is here. So again, thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to hand it over to Margaret Norman to interview Florina. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, Zoe. And is this working? Yeah, I think so. No? Okay, hold on. No, it's working.
When you're like, it's right there.
Okay, just need to hold it really close. Thank you all for being here today, and thank you for Florina for being our guest. Really excited to have Florina here with us today, and I will just say that Florina has such an interesting story. It's also a really great full circle story that I think you are going to all enjoy hearing. We are going to try to get through a lot in our 45 minutes today, and we'll just see where we get with it. So let's dive right in. And I think that probably most of our audience knows that you were born in Moldova. You lived there until you were 6 years old. And we're going to spend some time in the early part of our interview today talking a little bit about that portion of your life and coming here to Birmingham. And so I'd love if you could just kick us off with, you know, what if anything do you remember about that time before leaving Moldova?
Sure. Thank you guys so much for being here. This is one of my favorite programs, and I'm honored to be a part of it. So I was born in Chisinau, Moldova. That's the capital of Moldova. It's part of it used to be part of the former Soviet Union, but now it's its own country. And I was born in 1983, and like as Margaret said, we left when I was 6. And so I was very young, but I remember snippets of things, you know, as you do when you're younger. And, you know, we have pictures and people have told stories. So like, you know, like there are things that sort of, you know, the blanks were filled a little bit more. But I remember just like snippets of things, like my mom would take me to children's plays. That was very important to her. New Year's is such a big deal for the former Soviet Union folks. And so like we would gather at my grandmother's, who's an amazing cook and baker. And like we would have these big New Year's celebrations. I remember being in school. I remember playing like outside. I remember like there's actually a picture of me with like the snow that was like bigger than me, and I'm like in my furry, jacket. And so I also wanted to tell about my banana story. I don't know if we've talked about this, Margaret.
I don't think this came up yet.
But I have a banana story, and it's really interesting because just about every millennial my age from the former Soviet Union back in the day have their banana story. And so the Soviet Union was so closed off, and you can't really get anything past that Iron Curtain. And so there was so much that my family and I, and most everyone that lived in the Soviet Union didn't know about, or maybe have just heard about, and bananas was one of those things. And so for most people, like most kids my age, the first time they ever have seen a banana, tasted a banana, knew anything about bananas was when they left the Soviet Union. Now, I still don't know how, but my banana story actually happened in Chisinau. My dad somehow obtained a banana. And I clearly remember sitting like on the stoop. I like him showing me like how to peel a banana and how to eat it. And for some reason, that's one of these memories that has always stayed in my mind. And when I talk to other people, like I said, other people my age now, and then they also have like, oh, the banana story. I have my banana story. And so like that's something I don't know if can you hear me? Yeah. And so that's something that's always stuck with me. And I feel like I also probably can't get away without telling my tonsils story. So my brother, Boris, he's younger than me, he had his tonsils taken out here in America. And it was great because he, got to hear everything that was going to happen. And he took this picture with the surgeon right before, the thumbs up. And then he got put to sleep. And then, he had ice cream and popsicles, and it was great and wonderful. But in the Soviet Union, they did things very differently in the 80s. And so when I needed my tonsils out, I was 5, and my mom took me to the doctor. I had no idea what was happening. I was escorted to the back room, the doctor and the nurse, and there was no putting to sleep. It was me sitting in a chair, and they pulled my hair, my head back, and when the doctor says, open your mouth and say, and they kind of look in your throat, and so I did, and they pulled those tonsils out. And I clearly remember that, and then having to sort of recover afterwards with a bunch of other kids that went through the same torture afterwards, and we were like looking out the window, and our parents were waving at us, and there was no popsicles and ice cream, but that was sort of the Soviet Union for you guys.
Well, this is a good transition. I feel like my next question might sound a little bit obvious now at this point. So, in the late 80s, the Soviet Union was opening up, and there were opportunities for families like yours to leave. My next question was, well, one, I want you to tell us a little bit about how, and particularly the role your grandmother played in orchestrating your family's exit, but also why it felt so important to leave Moldova at that point. And now that you said the thing about the tonsils, it sounds a little obvious, but I know there's some broader context there too to share.
Right. So the Soviet Union wasn't great. We all know that now. But especially it wasn't great for Jews, and there was a lot of anti-Semitism, and it was quotas to get into schools. It was a certain kind of jobs that you needed to have. It's kids being bullied in school. It's sort of like you had this network of people, like even in Kishinev, like my mom would always say, I had you placed in a specific preschool classroom where I know the teacher is Jewish, and she will take care of you, and she'll make sure that you get the food or whatever it is. It's that network of that Jewish community, and so we had to stick together. But it was not good for anyone really living in the Soviet Union, with the shortages and not knowing what was really going on, but also for the Jews. And so in 1989, when the perestroika was happening, the rebuilding, the glasnost under Gorbachev, and the people were allowed to leave, some of the first groups that were allowed to leave were the Jews. And so there was this big lottery that happened, and my grandmother, Sophia Rottenberg-Schildkraut, and for those of you who remember her, she was a force to be reckoned with, and she didn't tell anybody, but entered us into this lottery at the time. And so we won the lottery. I always say I guess I can't really win the lottery twice, because I've won it once, the lottery of freedom. And so she didn't tell anyone, because it was her way, and this is what was happening, but also because there was so much uncertainty about leaving. And before, when people tried to leave, the refuseniks, they were called, and they couldn't, they were ostracized. And if you put yourself forward like that, and you weren't able to leave, you would lose your job, you would be, your kids would be bullied in school, you wouldn't have friends anymore. And so it was very, very, very hush-hush and secret. And we won this lottery, and in September of 1989, we were one of those first exoduses out. And once again, it was done so quietly that, one snippet I remember is leaving in the middle of the night on a bus, and families saying goodbye to us. And so it was done because, so that people wouldn't know, because you never know what happens until it happens, because a lot of these buses, we heard later, were actually stopped and searched, and we had 2 bags that we were able to take per person, and so obviously all of our belongings, all of our precious belongings were in those bags, and people, these buses were raided. Ours was not, and so we made it safely to the train station. And then we were on our way to Vienna, our first stop.
I'm going to ask you more about that stop in a second, but I'd also love to give you an opportunity to say anything more about your grandmother. She had a really interesting story. She was a Holocaust survivor. Anything you want to add about her story here?
She is. So my grandmother, when the war started, but the Great War, as we've always heard them say, was very young, and she had a baby sister, and her father was actually sent up to the front, and he was killed at the front. And her family was evacuated at the very last minute as the Nazis were coming. And literally bombs flying overhead. She would always say that her mother would just sort of try to, cover her and her sister to see, as bombs were flying, to try to make sure that they were okay. And they got away deeper into Russia, which is actually what happened to my maternal grandmother as well, from Hungary. They went deeper into Russia, into the Ural Mountains, while her grandparents stayed, saying, well, what are they going to do to us old people? And they were killed by the Nazis. So my grandmother, grew up. I think everyone in that generation really grew up and worked very hard. And once again, she was very formidable. She was the matriarch of our family. I know some of you remember her. Like I said, amazing baker, amazing cook. Always had all the family over. All the celebrations happened in her house, and she, what she said went. And so when we got this opportunity to go, we all had to go.
Yeah, she sounds like a really, really formidable lady. And I know we're going to circle back to the baking a little bit at the end, but I want to move us to the next stop in your journey, which was Italy. So your family embarked on what was called the Vienna-Rome circuit. So Vienna and then Italy.
Mm-hmm.
But one question I sort of had about this journey, you spent some time basically waiting in Europe to be let into the U.S. But you also mentioned to me that there were families who were going on to Israel and that was sort of an expedited process. Why do you think going to the U.S. specifically was so important for your family?
So the United States, for just about anyone in the former Soviet Union, was like the El Dorado of the world. And so it was always that goal to get to the United States. And so when we left Kishinev, and our first stop was the train station in Vienna, and we were then greeted actually by some people from our community were there. I found out afterwards.
Do you know who any of them were?
Edward Goldberg, I think, was one of them. I think Steve Brickman maybe said he was between between Vienna and Rome. I know that the Hesses ended up going into the Soviet Union, and so that was very dangerous. And back in the day, to kind of talk to the people and help the people there. And it's we definitely had people in our community that were very much a part of, this story. And it also goes back to quite a few people from our community that went to the Freedom March in DC to sort of pressure the government, to pressure the Soviet government to even make sure that any of this happened, that the doors were open and that we were allowed to be out. And so there were people at the time, kids that were even my age that I've seen in these pictures. And so our community was very active with this issue on all sorts of fronts, and we'll get to more of that later. But also with the federation system and kind of how it is now, we're sort of we make sure the information gets out, we make sure that the money is collected, and then the boots on the ground are the partner agencies. And at that time, the partner agencies were the JDC, the Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, which it still is now, and HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. And so HIAS handled the immigration papers and that, and JDC sort of handled the logistics of the transportation, the food, the housing, and everything like that. And so we basically left. We didn't know where we were going. We didn't know how, where, why, and we were greeted by other Jews that were helping us. We were refugees at that point. And so we stayed in this big house building. I'm not sure they turned it into just lots and lots of beds, and we shared bathrooms with people. We were there for about a month, and you had to change, and so somebody would hold a sheet over, so nobody else could see, so that you would change. But we received food, and we received help and everything that we needed at the time. So that was Vienna. And then at that time, if you wanted to go to Israel, make Aliyah, that was easy. That's something you could do right away. For some families with some of the other European countries like Germany, there's some other countries, if you had family there, you could go there easily too. America was hard. And so we did have to wait. And so basically the next waiting point for us, for those that really, really like, so America or bust, we went to Rome, and there were a lot of us, like refugees, and it was a great place to be a refugee at the time. It was, very lovely fall, September, October of that year, and we all were sort of settled in these like gorgeous little coastal towns, like near Rome, and kind of took over those towns. And so I remember these snippets of my grandfather found a bike for me and kind of fixed it up, and riding my bike around. Like the beaches were absolutely gorgeous. It was like, like if you go to Italy right now and you're like vacationing in a coastal town. So that was, for at least for a kid, it was a really, really nice memory of being there. My parents, and, it was a little bit harder. Once again, we received food, and we received, what we needed. But we had to make up, so like the men would go out and sell like the matryoshka, whatever like we brought, the spoons, like the nice things that we brought with us. They would sell to sort of make sure that everyone had enough food. But it was an interesting time, an interesting sort of place to be in Italy.
Well, and I know that adding to that interesting time too is the fact that your mom was pregnant when you all left Moldova and had your brother in Italy. And I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit more about that story, because you also shared with me, how you've looked back on that after becoming a parent yourself, and kind of the perspective it's given you on your parents' journey during that time.
Absolutely. My parents were young. Like I said, I was 6. My mom was 7 months pregnant when she was basically told by my grandmother that we're going, so she left her family behind and everything she knew. Obviously, my parents knew this was a better opportunity for themselves and their kids. And so she went not knowing where and how and why. And I remember being pregnant with Mila, my oldest, back here, hey Mila, and thinking, oh my gosh, like the sheer, first of all, uncomfortableness of it all. And then, she gave birth at a hospital in Rome. She didn't understand a single word anybody was saying. I cannot even imagine. And at the time, I don't know what it's like now in Italy, but at the time, being a Catholic country, they also did not allow for pain medication during birth. And she kept asking for an epidural, and she wasn't going to get it. And, obviously not understanding. And so she always said that, when Boris came out, he was also giant. She always said that that was the hardest thing she'd ever had to go through. So maybe that's why I was her favorite. But yeah, that was a lot. But just thinking through it, how much faith she had to have and how brave she had to be, and to be in that very precarious position, and to start over completely, and to not even know where and how and why. I just have a lot of gratitude for her. But I thought of that through both of my pregnancies. Gosh, I don't know how she did that. So
yeah, I truly cannot imagine. Even getting on a bus 7 months pregnant does not sound so great. Well, let's move on to Birmingham. Help us connect the dots. How does your family finally get from Italy to Birmingham? And, had your family heard of Birmingham, Alabama before being told this was where they were going to go?
So the way it happened was there was a matching program. And first of all, it took a while. We were in Italy for 6 months, and every week there was a sort of group gathering where people would receive their mail if they could, someone could find wherever they were and get mail. And this was also where you would sort of receive your letter of saying you've been accepted, you're going to the island or whatever, like that movie. But and everyone's like, well, you hear people like, oh my God, we're going, it's us, we finally, and then people are waiting. And so at some point it was us, it was our turn, and we were, oh my gosh, it's us, it's Birmingham, Alabama. What, where, how, why? No one had any idea. And so I think what was happening at the time was a lot of people were obviously going to some of these bigger cities, New York, Chicago, and the Jews, that ended up there, and then later on my cousins actually ended up there. They had completely different lives than the Jews. They came to the other sort of either smaller cities or cities that didn't take as many, that didn't have that population. We were assimilated more. So Birmingham at the time, through the Federation, and then it turned into a Jewish Family Services project, decided to, as we were all active for this issue, decided that this was a time for us to bring in some new community members. And I think because Birmingham is a smaller city, it was decided they were going to take X amount of people, and they wanted also from a smaller city as well, so that, you know, Moscow Jews weren't coming to Birmingham and thinking, oh my gosh, like we're used to a bigger city, like what is this? And so we were somehow paired. I don't know where and how and why that, I don't know. But we were paired with Birmingham, Alabama, and so we got on a plane, went through New York to Birmingham. We're met at the airport by the Friedmans. Sally has a story about her trying to tell my mom about a baby car seat, and she was like, what do you mean? Like, what is that? What is this? Then we were settled in Birmingham. But that's how we got here specifically.
Well, I know you already told us your banana story, which happened in Kishinev, but what other, are there any other sort of pieces of culture shock when you arrived, either for your family or for you? I know you were young, but still, I can imagine this was a very different environment in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. So first of all, I want to say that I have a list in my office that I keep. I found it somewhere at the Federation in a drawer somewhere. It's how we keep things. And it was a list, like lots of different lists of all the people in our community that were on committees to help with this resettlement project. And so a lot of your names are on that list. And if you'd like to see it, you come by my office. But it was, like the housing committee, the committee of physicians, in case someone needed to be seen, a couple of people that, could speak Russian or could speak Yiddish and they could communicate with us, the, ESL, like English as a second language, like, tutors, like all of these different ways to be able to, welcome us and embrace us into this community and help us, because we came with nothing but those 2 suitcases per person, and help us get our jobs, like the sheets on our bed. I mean, like everything that we needed. And I still keep this list. I think it's fascinating. I think it's wonderful that there was a time that, despite probably any differences, our community could get together and work together on something that is so important, that I think changed the trajectory of this Jewish community and other people in our lives. And I always sort of look back to that, especially now in these sort of turbulent times when sometimes it doesn't feel like we are as together as we can be, but there's definitely things that unite us. And that was one of those things that I always like to remember. With the friendship families that we had, those were families assigned to us, that would help us sort of transition. And, I think for most people, one of the biggest culture shocks was the grocery stores. You walk into the grocery store and there are things there, like there's food there and it's fresh and there's a lot of it. And if you wanted toilet paper, it's there. And not only that, there's like a whole, like you could pick which one you wanted. And it was just amazing, like just the amount of things that were available. And so I think people were completely culture shocked by that. Something that's kind of strange was that, in the Soviet Union, sometimes there wasn't as much water. And so people didn't shower every day. That wasn't something that was part of the culture. And here we were told people shower every single day, and that's what you should do. And they're like, they waste so much water. I can't believe it. Oh my God. And that was something that, people had to kind of get used to. And also something that was really strange was people here are nice. And they smile, and they smile at you. And in the Soviet Union, if you're smiling at someone, you're tricking them. And so the people are kind of wary of that if you're trying to be nice. And so there was a lot that we really had to get used to. And I mean, for me as a kid, it was obviously very easy. But for the grown-ups, from what I've heard, and it was a little bit, it was different.
I have to tell you, I had the same culture shock with the smiling thing, though, coming down from New England. So that translates.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I mean, it's just fascinating to think of your family coming in, and they were clearly so welcomed by the Jewish community. I did want to prompt you, are there any names that you do want to shout out from that list that you can remember, or we should all just go see the list?
Everybody can come see the list in my office, please. You're welcome.
Okay. And one question I didn't ask you that I'm curious about was, how many other families like yours were resettled around the same time? Were there other kids your age in this community who were also coming from the Soviet Union?
There were. I don't know the number, but we really sure helped fill out the day school at the time. And there were other kids. There was families. We came in This was May of 1990, and all the way through the 90s, more families would come. And as families came, then they would send for like their other families. So like as our family came, then my mom, and a couple of years later, like her family, we sponsored them to come here, and so like that's how they ended up here too. And so at some point there was quite a community here, and so it's definitely much smaller now. I know a lot of people have moved away, and but there's still that core that is here as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it is amazing to your point. And we'll come back to some of these themes, but to really see the community mobilizing around, an initiative of that scale is really cool. So you mentioned the day school a moment ago, and I want to get to sort of all the Jewish institutions. But before I do, I would love for you to talk just a little bit too about like what role Judaism played in your family growing up, like what. Just a little bit more about like how your family connected to Judaism.
Sure. In the Soviet Union, not a lot. It's interesting because, the Soviet Union was, anti-religion of all sorts. And yet we were still known as Jews. So we couldn't practice our religion, but we were always called out for being Jewish. Like our passport said Jew on it. And so like it was, that's very frustrating. It was like certain traditions. Like my grandparents grew up, like my grandfather grew up in a shtetl, so before the war, they were definitely more, they practiced more of the traditions, but after the Great War and when like it was very Soviet, that was not the case anymore. But like, what I heard was every spring, my great grandmother would make matzah. Like when was Passover? Like there was no Seder, there was nothing, but she would make matzah and like we would eat matzah. There is video footage of, my parents getting married and having their wedding in whatever socialist hall, whatever communist, whatever marriage was. And then coming back to celebrate later at my grandparents, and this wasn't filmed, but they had a secret chuppah ceremony in my grandmother's bedroom. We still have the ketubah that was written out. I don't know where they found a rabbi, but there must have been some sort of secret rabbi around that would do these sorts of things. But like the Jews still did some of those really important core like traditions, like secretly, whether they knew why or how, they still did it. But we were not very like religious or traditional there. And when we moved here, that we were then allowed to be, we didn't know how to be. And so I will say like that's where like if we want to like transition into like the day school, for example, which was such a huge important part of my life and my family's life. It's like every time I step into the day school, I feel like literally I'm so comfortable and I'm at home. This is where we were taught, who we are and how to be Jewish and why we're Jewish and why that matters. And I clearly remember my cousins and I, even at Passover Seder, it's like a whole family sitting here and we're performing like the Seder, like they don't know anything about it and they're just sort of staring at us. And of course, every 2 seconds, like, what are we going to eat? Is this part over? And so we would bring that religion into our family because we were taught how to do it. And so it was sort of like that mix of like traditional, like we're like always knowing you're Jewish, like knowing that this is like who you are, this is your family, your grandparents survived the Holocaust, like you always knew that. But the actual like traditions, like the actual like lighting candles, etc., that came from us kids learning that at day school, at temple, and really like just also going back to the day school, like learning about who you are and where you're from, and the history is so important to me because it really shapes who I am and what I do. But also like the most important thing I learned at the day school was how to be a good person, how to be like that mensch, as we call it, and really how to be a good citizen, how to have that was sort of like my North Star and continues to be like. And so like I think when I left the day school in 8th grade, like I was prepared, like I knew exactly like who I was, who my family was, where we come from, who my people are, who my community is, and what I could do about it. And so that has always been incredibly important to me, and I'm so proud, and we'll get to that later, but both of my girls are at the day school now learning these same concepts and values, and I'm very thankful for that. we're going to talk about other organizations.
Yeah, but I do just want to say
Yeah.
too, it's really, that answer is so interesting to me. One, I love the anecdote about your grandmother making matzah even without the Seder. But you know what you just said about the day school, I've heard other people in our interviews in Southern Jewish Voices say that about, and I can't remember who now, but I feel like one or two other people who have kids at the day school
Probably
have
Carly.
talked about, yeah, maybe Carly, about the way in which they also learn from what their children are learning. And I just think that's really neat that that keeps coming up as a recurring theme. But I would love to prompt you to also share, we see how the Federation has been in your life.
Yeah.
We'll kind of come back to Federation and the day school. What about the synagogues, the J? Talk a little bit more about, how Jewish institutions shaped your life growing up.
Sure. So, whenever I see someone giving a tour of the J, I kind of in my head have my own tour of the J, and it's really like, this is the place where like in the fitness center behind the chairs. Remember the phone used to be there, like for everyone able to use the phone? Well, no one could use the phone because my friends and I would be at that phone the entire time, calling every store about which Beanie Babies they had, and then we would call our moms to go pick up those, Susan, that was you, picking up those Beanie Babies. And Ruth, Ruth, I think I saw you in here. I'm so sorry. We were such monsters. We were such monsters running around the J like it was our own home. And then I would say, and here's the pool, and this is where I learned, how to swim, like through my patches. I was a dolphin patch. I was very proud of that. And, and this is the youth lounge where we'd all wait for our turn to play the 007 video game. And this is, the gym where I played basketball, and the field where I played soccer, and the library where the older BBYO girls yelled at us. I guess they were trying to haze us or something to try to get us into BBYO. And, this is the back of the woods where I don't know how or why, I guess they don't do this anymore, but we were just allowed to roam. We were allowed to roam this entire building and this entire the backwoods, even though there was supposedly some scary man that might have lived in the cabin, or maybe that was just a story they told us that Isa remembers that. And so this is also another home away from home. I know every single inch of this building. And when we had our JCC camp sleepovers, we were literally allowed. I mean, we went into that 18 or older, the dressing rooms, and we got into the saunas, and we did all these things that you guys don't know about. And it was
right now.
Yeah, now you do. But it was a really amazing time to grow up here in the community, and we were just all allowed to roam free. And it was great. Now there is more supervision for our kids, which I very much appreciate. So thanks to the J. So you mentioned, what Carly was saying, and I've heard this from Carly, I think when Isa was doing her interview, and from some others. But us growing up, I also felt very comfortable in all of our synagogues. Now, we were more of a Bethel family, but we, every single one of our synagogues was just also felt like home. I remember the old KI building, and they had these amazing Purim carnivals. Remember they had pony rides, and it was just absolutely wonderful. And, with our Chabad rabbis, that was probably the first Shabbats my family had ever gone to. And at Emmanuel in high school, me and my friend Angela Goldstein, what's Angela's last name now? Anyways, Angela Goldstein, Cohen, our little side hustle was to tutor some of the kids in Sunday school that needed help with their prayers. And so we did that for a while. And obviously the trip that we took with my age group from Bethel in 8th grade to Israel, my first time to Israel, was an absolutely amazing, core memory. So I just, we all felt really comfortable, and all of the organizations, all of the agencies, all the temples in our community, just growing up here was just a really, really wonderful time.
I have to say, too, that you are not the first person to publicly apologize to Ruth during this program either. So that's another recurring theme of Southern Jewish Voices, apparently. No, it's really interesting to hear about. It definitely does reflect how I've heard other people, you mentioned Carly and Isa, talk about that time. I'm going to kind of keep moving us and give a little cliff notes for this next portion, the Florina Newcomb cliff notes.
Cool.
So after the day school, I know you went to the IB High School here in Birmingham, and then Birmingham Southern College, RIP, where you studied international studies in business, thinking you might work at the UN. Now, similar, your role today. But I do want to give you a chance during this sort of portion of your life to talk a little bit about meeting Andrew and giving him the shout out that he deserves and that you wrote in your notes to me.
Fine.
Since he's here.
It was very romantic. We met at an off-campus ATO party, and we played pool. And I kept getting frustrated because he wouldn't let me play by the girl rules. You know, when you can kind of like move the ball if it's too close to whatever, so you can like position a certain way. And he was like, "No, we're playing."
I had actually never heard of this before you put that in your notes. I was like, "What is she talking about?"
It's called girl rules. And he wouldn't let me. But guess what? I won that game. I'm so proud of that. And we went on like a date, I guess, with dates back then were just like a bunch of people, like a hangout date and the person you were on a date with, like a few days later, and here we are now, married with 2 kids and a very long like shared chores list on our phone like notes app. So that's us. And Andrew's been really wonderful. He didn't grow up Jewish. His family is originally from St. Louis and then moved to Decatur, Alabama. His dad worked as an engineer at the Arsenal for the Black Hawk helicopters. And so Andrew went to high school in Decatur and then UAB, and so we were Birmingham Southern, UAB, we met at a party. And so he didn't grow up Jewish, but he knew probably from that very first time as we were playing pool, he knew how exactly important Judaism was in my life, and like that is, how I'm going to raise my kids, and like that is what is going to happen. And so he knew that pretty much right away. And when we can get to that in a second, but when we were living in Memphis, when we were engaged, Andrew converted, and I've heard from him like many times that he was like, I'm gonna walk into a room and people are just gonna know that I'm not Jewish, right? And so like it was always that kind of a feeling. But fast forward, and we'll kind of get back to it, but when we moved back here, there was a time when we talked about it, and we were welcomed and everything, but when the Federation sort of started that young leadership program, that first young leadership cohort, and I really sort of nudged Andrew to apply, and he that really is what brought him in to our community, and he learned about the history of our community, about all of our agencies and synagogues, and went to Israel for the first time with me, which was very special. And he is now just like a full-fledged member of our community. He feels very involved. He's on the J board, the day school board. If anybody wants him on his board, he doesn't say no. So, just so you know, but he's here, as a true partner, a wonderful father who has really embraced this community as it has embraced him. And I'm just very grateful for Andrew Newcomb.
Well,
he's right there.
You can ask him about your boards after the program. You mentioned a moment ago living in Memphis, and so you did. After meeting Andrew here in Birmingham, you lived in Memphis, Baton Rouge, Atlanta. Mm-hmm. But I want you to talk a little bit about, when I asked you if you always intended to come back, you kind of said that was always the goal. Tell me what drew you back to this community, and I do love that Snowpocalypse is part of this story.
So once again, when I said growing up here was just an amazing childhood, just being part of this community is just a warm hug. And I have always, whenever we moved because Andrew had the opportunity to do some training for his job, and that's when we moved to all these different places. The intention was always, one day we'll have kids, and then we'll come back when they're old enough or whatever, and they'll do all the things that we, that I did, because Andrew didn't do these things, but that I did, that were important to me. And so we were living in Atlanta at the time. We lived there for 3 years. I was working at the Shepherd Center and their foundation, which is a private hospital for people with spinal cord and brain injuries. It was a really, really great job that I'm very proud of. And Snowpocalypse happened. I was pregnant with Mila, and we, Andrew on his end, couldn't get home. I couldn't get home. It was a very scary day, just like it was here in Atlanta. Everything shut down. I was on the road for hours, not without food, without anything. There was somebody from work whose parents lived nearby, ended up spending the night at these people's home. Like, it was incredibly scary. And we just kind of looked at each other after all this happened, and we thought, we don't really know anybody here. Atlanta is huge. It's wonderful. It's great. And like so many, 25,000 Jews, but like we felt alone. And so we thought, well, why don't we go ahead and move now? Like, because we want to be closer to family. We want to be close to like that network and the community. And so we decided to do that. So we moved. Oh my God. Mila was born in Northside Hospital, Atlanta on a Monday. We sold our house on that Friday and moved. And I highly do not recommend that. It was also a core memory. Not great, but whatever, means to an end. And yeah, we came back home to Birmingham.
So to kind of piggyback off that, tell me a little bit about us. That does sound crazy, but we're glad it brought you back here. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about, what it's been like to raise your girls in this community, doing all the things like you said that you did growing up. I'm sure some differences too, but talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Like I said, my girls go to the day school. They also run around the J, but in a more looked after manner, thanks to the J. And we just, this is like our bubble. We once again feel comfortable at all the synagogues. We're members of Bethel, and we just making sure that we're participating, that we're engaged, to make sure to give them that same sort of that childhood that I loved so much, that all of my peers loved so much. Like, it's wonderful to be able to, know that we still have this community. We're still doing this for our children. And that's why it's so important for me, even we'll get to my position at some point, but that we're continuing to do this for, hopefully for when our kids are older and for their kids. Like, this is a very special place, and we have kept up with it very well.
That's awesome. Well, as you mentioned, I do want to ask you some about your new position, and we're moving kind of into the close of our interview. So I'm going to ask you some kind of big picture questions about your time at Federation, and then of course one fun closing question. So you did tell me that you've been at the Federation for 10 years now. Mm-hmm. So you started working at the Federation about a year after Mila was born, decided you wanted to go back to work, and Richard, let you know that there was a position open. The rest is history. But I would love for you to talk a little bit about, what are some of the highlights of your Federation career so far that have brought you to this point? And I will just say, too, that we did not know that Florina was going to be our new CEO when we asked her to do this interview, but that's definitely the cherry on the top of having you here today. So next I'll ask you a little bit about your priorities going forward.
Okay, sure. Yes, it was September of 2015. A few months before, I love you, Mila, and I loved staying home with Mila, but I was ready to go back to work. And I emailed Richard and I said, here's my resume. I have, experience in nonprofit, work in the foundation and fundraising and events. And if you know of anyone, can you please pass this along? And Richard said, actually, we have something open. Because Amanda Sokol, I got on maternity leave and stayed on maternity leave. And so, like you said, the rest is history. I started working, doing our IWJB, our Overseas Allocations Committee. And I was really proud of, what it was then and how it's grown over the years. But I'm really, really proud of is our Young Family Programming, our PJ Library. I would say that's my third baby. And so, when we moved back and I had baby Mila and I was in I don't even know what La La Land, a lot of my friends had left, and so they weren't in Birmingham. And, the few that were maybe were in a different phase of life. And I did feel kind of isolated and alone. And so one of the first things that happened was with PJ Library, which we were at that time sending books to kids, which was lovely and wonderful, and we still are. But that programming and that community aspect wasn't there yet. And so what I'm most proud of is over those 10 years building that out, and that is how I met all my friends, and that is how we now have bubbies, first Shalom baby for like our 0 through 24 months. And we're proud with the J to be able to partner with the J on that program, to be able to welcome like the new moms, the new parents that just have their baby and have no idea what's going on, whether they're new to the community or just new to parenthood, and having like these baby play dates and programs. And then we move into Bubby's STEM Kitchen that we very proudly partner with the day school on for 2 through pre-K, and like that builds that community, and also I think helps the day school with their recruitment process as well. And then we noticed there was sort of a gap that after Bubby's STEM Kitchen there wasn't really much going on for like those older kids, and so Shalom Chaverim sort of came into fruition in the past couple of years, and we partnered with Chabad on that, and that's that kindergarten through 2nd grade. And we're going to continue to evolve. YJP, Young Jewish Philanthropy, is that 3rd through 5th grade that we're hoping to continue to evolve, and all the way, and then they get into BBYO, and that pipeline, and then they're sitting here and they're full-fledged members of our community. But making sure that our young families know each other, that they know our community, know our agencies, having that community and is very special, and something that I know I needed when I moved back, and something that we continue to do, and that's something that I've sort of helped establish over the past 10 years, and I'm very, very proud of.
So I think that this question will kind of feed off of that one. I want to ask you about sort of what your biggest priorities are moving forward. What is exciting to you, what feels challenging to you. But I also wonder too if, throughout this interview, I think you've talked about sort of community coming together, and I'd love to know how that kind of plays into how you see your work at the Federation going forward.
Exactly. So it's harder now for our community to come together. Every single thing seems very polarizing. But once again, there were times when we did come together, when we spoke with a more unified voice. I think the Federation is going to continue to do what Federation does best, and be that convener of our community, whether that's through education, through programs, and also to be that funder, like our fundraising, our annual campaign, is our bread and butter, and making sure that we are able to help fund our agencies and through grants, our synagogues, making sure we're able to fund all of our programs, and so that we can have that same community that, like I said, we've done a very good job over however many years to continue this, and we need to continue this. And so the Federation is going to still be here and stay, tried and true to our mission and our values, and be that organization that sort of brings this community together.
I love that. And final closing question, a fun one. So you and I share a love of Eastern European food of all kind. What's a favorite dish that you would share? And I think this is going to bring it back to your grandma, so really full circle.
It is. So I would highly recommend for everyone, next time they go to New York, to go to Brooklyn, to go to Brighton Beach, and to go and eat some really, really, really delicious Eastern European food. My favorite food is my grandmother's Napoleon cake. She was a wonderful baker, as I said, and it was so delicious. And I still have her cookbook, but her cookbook is just really like a notebook with like these random notes, and it was like a teacup of this and like a spoonful of this, and like, what is the teacup of what is that? I don't know. So one day if I can figure it out, and I'll try to make a Napoleon cake, and we'll all come back here and you guys can have some. So but that's what I would say is something I just absolutely have always loved.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Florina, for being here with us today, and thank you all for coming. We'll give her a round of applause.
Thank you so much.
And I'll shout out our final date. Maybe somebody here like Brooke or Zoe has it, is in December, but I will tell you that it is going to be a really special interview. It will be with 3 generations of the Pizitz family. It will be the challenge of a lifetime to do that in 45 minutes, but it should be really interesting. So definitely come for that. The 17th. Yeah. Be there. Okay. Thanks all.